The performance summary stated I had failed to deliver the investor presentation materials. The investor relations team had time-stamped confirmation that I'd submitted the complete deck 72 hours before the deadline. My VP had reported to the CEO that my negligence had jeopardized the funding round. I'm Amy. I've been working as a financial analyst at an automotive parts manufacturing facility in Vancouver for 2 years. I prepared investment documentation and quarterly reports for the executive team. The investor presentation had been my primary project for 6 weeks. Full financial analysis, market projections, competitive positioning, 43 slides with supporting appendices. I'd submitted everything to the shared investor portal on Monday at 3 p.m. The deadline was Thursday at 5 p.m. The portal automatically generated receipt confirmations. I'd received mine. Timestamped, dated, complete file inventory listed. I'd saved the confirmation email. Friday morning, I received a meeting request from my VP. Subject line: Q3 Investor Materials Discussion. I joined the call at the scheduled time. She said the CEO was disappointed. She said the investor presentation materials had not been delivered. She said the investors had gone into Thursday's meeting without proper documentation. I asked which materials were missing. She said the entire presentation deck. I asked if there had been an issue accessing the portal. She said the problem wasn't access. The problem was that I hadn't uploaded the materials. I asked if she'd checked the portal submission logs. She said she didn't need to check logs. She said the investors had confirmed they received nothing from our team. I asked if I could speak with the investor relations coordinator to verify. She said that wouldn't be necessary. She said the CEO had already been informed of the situation. She said my performance would be reviewed in light of this significant failure. The call ended. I opened my email. I pulled the portal confirmation from Monday. I read it again. Submission received, October 16th, 3:14 p.m. File count, 44, presentation plus appendices. Status, successfully uploaded. Accessible to Investment Committee, Investor Relations Team. I took a screenshot of the confirmation. I saved it in a new folder. Then I went back to work. My VP didn't contact me again that day. No follow-up email, no request for explanation. I continued with my regular work. I had quarterly variance reports due the following week. I pulled production data. I analysed cost trends. I prepared my analysis. The investor meeting had been Thursday. Today was Friday. If there had truly been a problem with the materials, someone would have contacted me Thursday evening. No one had. I logged into the investor portal. I checked the access history for my uploaded files. The presentation deck had been accessed 11 times since Monday, 4 different users. The timestamps showed views on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning. Someone had accessed the materials before the meeting. I took screenshots of the access log. I noted the user IDs. I saved everything in my documentation folder. I didn't email my VP. I didn't contact investor relations. I didn't defend myself. I went back to my variance reports. Monday arrived. I came in at my usual time. I attended the morning production meeting. I reviewed quality metrics with the plant manager. No one mentioned the investor presentation. Tuesday, I received an email from my VP. She was requesting a meeting for Wednesday afternoon. Subject: performance discussion. No other details. I accepted the meeting invitation. I brought nothing to the meeting except a notepad and pen. My VP started by saying the executive team had discussed my performance. She said there were concerns about attention to detail and reliability. I asked what specific examples supported those concerns. She cited the investor presentation failure. I asked if there were other examples. She said this incident alone was significant enough to raise questions about my capabilities. I asked if she'd reviewed the portal submission records. She said the outcome was what mattered. The investors didn't have materials. That was a failure on my part. I asked if she'd spoken with the investor relations team directly. She said she'd received confirmation from the CEO that materials weren't available for the meeting. I asked if I could see that confirmation. She said CEO communications were confidential. She then explained that I was being placed on a performance improvement plan. 30 days. Focus areas, attention to detail, deadline management, and communication. She handed me the document. It listed the investor presentation as the primary performance deficiency. It required weekly check-ins. It outlined specific deliverables I needed to complete. I read it carefully. I signed it to acknowledge receipt. I didn't write any qualifications. I took my copy. The meeting ended. I returned to my desk. I filed the PIP document. I continued working on my variance reports. That afternoon, I received an email from someone I didn't recognise. The sender was from the investor relations firm, external consultants who managed the funding process. The email was a routine follow-up survey about the Q3 investment documentation process. They sent it to everyone who'd contributed materials. One question asked, were materials submitted on time and in the requested format? I responded, yes. Materials submitted October 16th at 3:14 p.m. via portal. Deadline was October 19th at 5 p.m. I received an automated acknowledgement. I didn't think much of it. 2 days later, I noticed a change in my email patterns. I was no longer receiving the weekly executive summary that went to all analysts and managers. I checked the distribution list. My name had been removed. I noted the date. I didn't request to be added back. The following week, my VP forwarded me a project assignment, a detailed cost analysis for a potential equipment purchase. The project was small. It would normally go to a junior analyst. I accepted the assignment. I completed it thoroughly. I submitted it 2 days before the internal deadline. My VP acknowledged receipt. She didn't comment on the quality. 3 weeks into my PIP, I had my first check-in meeting. My VP reviewed my completed deliverables. She said they met minimum standards. She said she still had concerns about my judgment and professional reliability. I asked for specific examples beyond the investor presentation. She said patterns of behaviour weren't always about individual incidents. They were about overall impression and trustworthiness. I asked if there were documented incidents I should be aware of. She said this conversation was the documentation. The meeting ended. I went back to my desk. I updated my records. I noted her comments about trustworthiness. I still hadn't said anything about the portal confirmation. I hadn't mentioned the access logs. I hadn't contacted anyone to verify the investor materials had been received. I waited. 4 weeks into the PIP, I received a meeting request from HR. Not from my VP, from the HR business partner assigned to our division. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. I accepted. I prepared nothing. I brought my documentation folder, though I didn't plan to use it unless asked. The HR business partner began the meeting by explaining that they conduct routine reviews of all performance improvement plans. She said she wanted to understand my perspective on the situation. I explained the investor presentation timeline. I submitted materials 72 hours before deadline. I received portal confirmation. I was told the following day that materials weren't delivered. She asked if I had the portal confirmation. I did. I showed it to her. Timestamp, file list, successful upload confirmation. She asked if I'd shared this with my VP. I said my VP had told me the outcome was what mattered, not the submission records. She asked if I'd attempted to verify what happened. I said I'd been told the CEO confirmed materials weren't available. I'd been told CEO communications were confidential. She made notes. She asked about my other work during the PIP period. I described the projects I'd completed, the variance reports, the cost analysis, the routine financial updates. She asked if I'd received feedback on that work. I said it had been described as meeting minimum standards. She asked if I'd been given clear criteria for what would constitute successful completion of the PIP. I said no. I'd been told it was about overall impression and trustworthiness. She made more notes. She said she'd review the situation and following up within 2 weeks. I thanked her. I left the meeting. I returned to my work. 1 week later, something changed. I received an email from the investor relations firm. It was addressed to me with copies to the CEO, CFO, and my VP. The email thanked me for my timely submission of the Q3 investment materials. It specific noted that my presentation deck had been instrumental in securing the funding commitment. It mentions that the materials had been accessed by the investment committee multiple times in our HR about the meeting, allowing them to prepare detailed questions. It specified the level of financial analysis I provided had exceeded their expectations. The email ended with a request that I be involved in future investment documentation processes. I read it 3 times. I saved do immediately. I didn't respond to the email. I waited to see if anyone else would. 2 hours later, my working P sent me a meeting request. Tomorrow morning. Subject, urgent discuss. I acceptance. The next morning, I arrived at her office at the scheduled time. She said there had been a misunderstanding about the investor materials. She said it appeared the materials had been submitted after all. I asked what had caused the misunderstanding. She said there had been a communication error between departments. I asked if that communication error was documented anywhere. She said these things happen in complex organizations. I asked if the PIP would be updated to reflect this. She said she'd need to discuss that with HR. I asked when I could expect that discussion to occur. She said she'd let me know. The meeting ended. I went back to my desk. That afternoon, I received another meeting request, this time from the HR business partner. The meeting was scheduled for 3 days later. The attendee list included me, the HR business partner, and the CFO. My VP was not included. I accepted the meeting. I spent no time preparing. The documentation was already complete. The meeting day arrived. The CFO joined first, then the HR business partner. The CFO began. He said he'd become aware of a discrepancy regarding my performance review. He said the investor relations firm had sent very positive feedback about my work. He said that feedback contradicted the performance concerns that had been documented. He asked me to explain the timeline from my perspective. I walked through it. Material submitted Monday, deadline Thursday, confirmation received, called into meeting Friday, told materials weren't delivered, told the CEO had confirmed this, placed on PIP. He asked if I'd tried to correct the misunderstanding when it occurred. I said I'd asked about reviewing portal records. I'd been told the outcome was what mattered. He asked if I'd contacted investor relations directly. I said I'd been told CEO communications were confidential and that I shouldn't reach out to external partners without authorization. He asked if I had the portal confirmation. I showed him. Timestamp, file list, access logs showing 11 views before the Thursday meeting. He reviewed everything carefully. Then he asked about the PIP period. He asked what work I'd completed. I listed the projects, variance reports, cost analysis, routine updates. He asked if any of that work had performance issues. I said it had been described as meeting minimum standards. He asked if I'd been given specific feedback on how to improve. I said no. I'd been told it was about overall impression. The HR business partner spoke next. She said she'd reviewed the PIP documentation. She said the only cited performance issue was the investor presentation. She said that issue now appeared to be based on incorrect information. She asked the CFO if he was aware of how the miscommunication had occurred. He said he'd been told by my VP that materials weren't available for the investor meeting. He'd conveyed that information to the CEO based on her report. He said he'd had no reason to question it until the investor relations firm sent their feedback email. The HR business partner asked if there was any documentation of the investors not receiving materials. He said there wasn't. He'd relied on my VP's verbal report. She asked if the company had policies about documenting performance issues before initiating PIPs. He said yes. The policy required specific, documented incidents. She said the PIP appeared to violate that policy. He agreed. They both looked at me. The CFO said the company was prepared to withdraw the PIP effective immediately. It would be removed from my file. They would provide a written statement that the performance concerns had been based on incorrect information. He asked if I found that acceptable. I asked about my work assignments. I asked if I would continue receiving junior-level projects. He asked what I meant. I explained that since the PIP began, I'd been assigned work below my role level. I'd been removed from distribution lists. I'd been excluded from strategic planning communications. He asked the HR business partner if she was aware of this. She said she'd need to investigate. I asked if my role and responsibilities would be restored to what they'd been before. He said he'd ensure that happened. I asked if this would impact my annual review or compensation. The HR business partner said the PIP withdrawal would note that all performance concerns had been unfounded. It would not affect my review. I asked for all of this in writing. The CFO said I'd receive documentation within 48 hours. I asked one more question. I asked if the communication error that had led to the PIP would be investigated. He said personnel matters were confidential, but the situation would be addressed. The meeting ended. I returned to my work. 2 days later, I received the documentation. The PIP was withdrawn. My file showed no performance concerns. A letter confirmed this had resulted from incorrect information and did not reflect my actual work quality. I saved everything. 1 week later, my VP announced she was transitioning to a different role. The announcement said she'd be moving to a special projects position reporting directly to the plant manager. It was described as a lateral move. No mention of the investor presentation matter. A new VP was assigned to our division 2 weeks later. She met with each team member individually. In my meeting, she asked about my current projects. She asked what I'd been working on. I explained my recent assignments, the variance reports, the cost analyses. She asked if those matched my role level. I said they were below my typical scope. She asked what I'd worked on before. I described the investor presentations, the quarterly board materials, the strategic financial analyses. She said she'd review my project assignments and get back to me. Within 2 weeks, I was reassigned to work I'd done before the PIP. Investor materials, board presentations, strategic analyses. My distribution list access was restored. My responsibilities returned to their previous level. I continued working. 3 months passed. I completed 2 more investor presentations. Both received positive feedback. The funding rounds they supported both closed successfully. My annual review was strong. My compensation increased. 6 months after the PIP withdrawal, I received a recruitment call. A competitor was hiring for a senior analyst position. The role was broader, the compensation was higher. I took the interview. They made an offer 2 weeks later. I accepted. I gave 4 weeks' notice. I documented my projects. I prepared transition materials. I handed off my accounts professionally. My last day was quiet. I packed my desk. I returned my badge and equipment. The new VP thanked me for my work. She said I'd be difficult to replace. I thanked her. I didn't mention why I was leaving. The investor presentation materials were still in the portal. All the files I'd uploaded that Monday in October. The access logs showed they'd been viewed 83 times throughout the funding process. The confirmation email was still in my records, time-stamped and dated. I kept all of it, filed digitally, organised chronologically. I moved to the new company. The work was what they'd described. The environment was more structured. A year later, I heard through professional contacts that my former VP had left the company. No details about why, just that she was no longer there. I didn't ask for more information. The documentation stayed in my personal files. The portal confirmation, the access logs, the investor relations email, the PIP withdrawal, the CFO meeting notes. I never had to show it to anyone after I left, but every time I submitted work through a portal or system, I saved the confirmation. Old habits, built from experience, tend to stay with you.